Good morning. Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, on the final day of July. Friday's supposed to be in the mid-hundreds again today. Maybe it will break by tomorrow. It's a good time to be going into Genesis, the saga of Abram, because he's traveling. Yesterday he was kicked out of Egypt because he lied to Pharaoh about who his wife was, saying it's really his sister, so that Pharaoh wouldn't kill him and take Sarai. God and Abram aren't yet on the same page. We've got to get there, though, because that's what's going to happen with this. There's going to be a change. And Abram, of course, will then have the change of name. But we have to get to some details first. Chapter 13, Abram went up from Egypt. So now he's heading back in the land of Israel. His wife and all that he had, and Lot, his nephew, is still with him. And now verse 2, we find out a little bit more about why they had to leave the land of Canaan during the famine. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And then it says that Lot also had herds, and it got to the point where each of them had such large herds, and they had herders. So they had people in their entourage, each of them, but they're now two separate families, and there's not enough grazing land to support all of these. There's just not enough of the grasses there, and they don't have enough grain to feed them, which is what took them to Egypt. But now they've got some food coming back then. Verse 8, Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred. Is not the whole land before you?" And this is the part I really like. Abram, the uncle, says to the nephew. Abram, the senior, the elder, says to the younger, "Take the left hand of the land if you want, and I'll take the right. Or if you take the right, I'll take the left." He is graciously saying to his nephew, "You get first choice. Where do you want? Do you want this place here, which is the land of Canaan, the descendants of Canaan, Noah's grandson? Or do you want the land over there that's watered by the Jordan River, that big plain?" And Lot thought about it and says, "Yeah, that plain. I bet it's well watered. I bet there'd be just abundant places for us then. We will go up and we'll settle there by this city called Sodom." And then inserted in here, just because, verse 10, the land, this is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so already we're getting a hint. Some authors will say, this is going to happen. It's forward, or some TV shows. They'll give you a hint of what's going to happen just to try to catch you. News reporters do that. We're going to tell you later in today's broadcast about. Sports reporters do that. So, who won, the Mariners or the Yankees? And then you have to stay through the broadcast. So that's what this is doing. By the way, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. Lot took his herds and he went and settled near Sodom. Oh, and yeah, Sodom, the people there are really, really wicked. So now it's saying, all right, more to the story. So that's a way the storyteller wants the reader to stay engaged in this story. And that's Lot, remember. Lot is not the central person of the story. Abram is. So why are they giving us all these details about Lot? Well, it's because it's going to show us another aspect of the character of God. Remember, could he, would he, did he? Could God do this? Is this within God's ability? Would God? Is it typical of God to do this kind of thing? And did he? Is there a historical record of God doing it? So keep in mind, Sodom and Gomorrah, there's something going to happen there, and we may know some stories, but we're going to get to that so that we can hear it all over again in the days and the weeks to come. Verse 14, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated, "Raise your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Rise up, walk the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Hebron is going to appear over and over in the story too. Hebron was the first capital when the kings became when a united nation of Israel. The 12 tribes were united for a brief period under Kings Saul, David, and Solomon. King Saul's capital was at Hebron. So this is the center of the land of Canaan, not that higher hill up there where the Jebusites live, Jerusalem. We're not going to deal with that for a long time to come, because that's not in the territory that they're conquering at this time. And then we move on. And here we go. It's now shifting to Lot. Well, it tells the story of a king of here and a king of there, the king of Shinar, the king of Eleazar, the king of Elam, and it names all these other kings that are in the land. So every city basically was a city-state. And they may have had walls, or they may have had outriders guarding their territory, but they became kings of that territory. And today it might be the size of a county, perhaps, but probably not a whole lot bigger than that. And they were generally identified by their tribe. When they had scattered out over the earth, they had their tribe, their people. So this is not unlike, I suppose, the Native American tribes, where there are hundreds and hundreds of them, but they each have their territory and they roam within their territory. And when they clashed, well, sometimes then that's how one expanded their territory. But for the most part then, they had their areas, and they didn't really bother each other that much, except for the occasional, as I say, conflict, then the border clashes. So here's an interesting detail, though. Chapter 14, verse 10. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of them fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So here's Sodom and Gomorrah mentioned again, but it hasn't yet told us why they fled Sodom and Gomorrah. But then enemy came and took all of the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and captured all the people. Lot lived in Sodom at this time. All of his goods, all of his herds and everything, they were part of Sodom, the area of Sodom. We don't think of it as a city so much, again, as a county. So Lot lived in the county, in the district of Sodom, and these other kings seem to have come together and decided they're going to take over the two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Someone escaped from there and found out that Lot had an uncle. So, verse 13, the one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre. So now he's Abram the Hebrew. Yeah, every so often we'll see that term. When we studied Ruth, it was Ruth the Moabite. They're constantly wanting us to remember that this is a different person. This is a person who has a tribal identity. And Abram's tribal identity is Hebrew. And the Hebrews are going to become known for one thing, for having a God who is above all other gods. But when Abram hears then that his nephew's been taken captive, verse 14, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night. He and his servants routed them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, brought back his nephew Lot with his goods and the women and the people. Where did Abram get a trained army? We have all this going on. And here's this guy who was 75 years old when God started this relationship with him. He's gone down to Egypt. He's come back. He's built up his flocks. Lot has gone off to Sodom. And so he could be 85 years old by now. And he's the general of a trained army as well as the head of a clan that has property, gold, silver, herdsmen. And he has no descendants. So that's still a problem. But he's got his nephew back, because at this point his nephew is going to inherit everything. But tomorrow we're going to get into this very strange detail. A priest named Melchizedek, or a king Melchizedek. We're going to look at that story because that gets used by some American religions in some really odd ways. See you tomorrow.